Charles Bronson heard a veteran crying in the street. What he did next saved 2 lives. It was 2:30 a.m. on a cold November night in 1978 when Charles Bronson heard the crying. He was walking back to his hotel in downtown Los Angeles after a late dinner with his agent, taking his time through the quiet streets. The sound stopped him dead in his tracks. It wasn't the crying of a child or a woman in distress. It was the deep, broken sobs of a grown man who had reached the end of his rope. Charles followed the sound down a narrow alley between 2 office buildings. There, sitting on the ground with his back against a brick wall, was a man in his 30s wearing a torn army jacket. His face was buried in his hands, and his entire body was shaking with grief. Charles approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Hey, buddy. You okay?" The man looked up, and Charles could see tear tracks running down a face that was gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. But it was the man's eyes that hit Charles the hardest. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much and lost everything. "Sorry," the man said, wiping his face with his sleeve. "I didn't know anyone was around. I'll move along." "You don't have to move anywhere," Charles said, sitting down on a wooden crate beside him. "What's your name?" "Tommy. Tommy Rodriguez." "I'm Charles. Charles Bronson." Tommy's eyes widened slightly. "The actor? The guy from Death Wish?" "That's me." "What branch?" "What?" "Military. You're wearing an army jacket, and you've got that 1,000-yard stare I've seen before. What branch did you serve in?" Tommy looked down at his jacket as if he'd forgotten he was wearing it. "Army. 173rd Airborne. 2 tours in Vietnam. Got back in '73. That was 5 years ago. What's been happening since then?" Tommy was quiet for a long moment, staring at legal documents scattered around his feet. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Everything fell apart, Mr. Bronson. Everything." Charles waited. He'd learned in Korea that sometimes the best thing you could do for a fellow soldier was just listen. "I came back and tried to go to college on the GI Bill. Wanted to be a teacher. But I couldn't concentrate. Too many nightmares, too many flashbacks. I'd be sitting in a classroom and hear a car backfire, and suddenly I was back in the jungle ducking mortar fire." Tommy's hands were shaking. "I tried to get help from the VA, but they kept telling me there was nothing wrong with me. Said I just needed to adjust to civilian life. They gave me some pills that made me feel like a zombie and sent me home." "What about family?" Tommy's face crumpled. "I had a wife. Maria. We got married right before I shipped out for my second tour. She waited for me 2.5 years. What happened? I came back a different person. The nightmares were so bad I couldn't sleep next to her. I'd wake up screaming, sometimes grab her thinking she was enemy. I started drinking to numb the pain." Tommy picked up one of the legal documents. "She left in '75. Said she couldn't handle the mood swings, the drinking, the nights when I'd wake up screaming. She took our daughter Katie with her. Katie was only 3 years old." Charles felt his chest tighten. "How old is she now?" 8. "She'll be 9 next month. I haven't seen her in over a year. Maria got a restraining order after I showed up drunk at Katie's school." "What about work?" "I had a job at a factory for a while. Assembly line work. But I kept having episodes. One day, a supervisor yelled at me, and something about his tone triggered me. I grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against a wall. Took 4 guys to pull me off." Tommy laughed bitterly. "They fired me, of course. Word got around about the crazy Vietnam vet. Nobody wants to hire someone like that. I've been living on the street for 8 months now." Charles looked around the alley, taking in Tommy's makeshift camp. A sleeping bag, a backpack, empty food cans. This was how America was treating its veterans. Tommy, what were you crying about tonight? What's in those papers? Fresh tears started flowing. I got a letter today. From my ex-wife's lawyer. Maria's getting remarried to a guy named Robert Chen. Works as an accountant, makes good money, stable job. He held up the document. They want me to sign away my parental rights. Her new husband wants to adopt Katie. The lawyer says it would be better for everyone if I just disappeared from her life completely. Are you going to sign? I don't know. Part of me thinks maybe they're right. Maybe Katie would be better off without a father who's a homeless drunk. Maybe I'm too broken to be anyone's dad. His voice dropped to a whisper. But she's my little girl. When I held her for the first time, I promised her I'd always protect her. I've broken every promise I ever made to her. Charles looked at this broken man and saw something that reminded him of wounded pride, a man who'd given everything for his country and gotten nothing but scorn in return. Tommy, let me ask you something. Do you love your daughter? More than my own life. Do you want to get better? Do you want to be the kind of father she deserves? Tommy looked at Charles, trying to decide if this stranger could be trusted. I don't know if I can. I've tried so hard, but every time I think I'm making progress, something triggers me, and I fall apart again. Charles stood up. Come on. Where are we going? First, we're getting you some food. When's the last time you ate? Tommy thought about it. 2 days ago. Maybe 3. Then we're getting you cleaned up and into some decent clothes. And then we're going to figure out how to get your life back. Tommy struggled to his feet. Mr. Bronson, charity isn't going to fix what's wrong with me. I've been to the free clinics, the soup kitchens. They can't fix a broken mind. Charles looked at Tommy with an expression that was both gentle and fierce. This isn't charity, Tommy. This is one veteran helping another. You served. Korea, 1951 to 1953. I know what it's like to come home from a war nobody wants to talk about. I know what it's like to have nightmares about things you can't forget. Charles helped Tommy gather his things. The difference is, I got lucky. I found acting, and it gave me a way to channel all that pain. But I never forgot that some of us didn't make it home in one piece. They walked toward Charles's hotel. There's something else you should know, Tommy. Something that's been eating at me for 25 years. What's that? When I was in Korea, there was a kid in my unit named Danny Murphy. Irish kid from Boston, maybe 19 years old. Funniest guy you ever met. Could make the whole platoon laugh even when we were taking fire. Charles's voice grew softer. Danny took shrapnel in his leg and got sent home. The night before he left, he told me he was scared about going back to civilian life. Said he didn't know how to be normal anymore. What happened to him? He killed himself 6 months after he got home. Jumped off a bridge in Boston. Left a note saying he couldn't figure out how to live in a world that didn't understand what he'd been through. Tommy stopped walking. Jesus. I swore after Danny died that if I ever had the chance to help another veteran who was struggling, I would do it. Because maybe if someone had helped Danny, he'd still be alive. Charles looked directly at Tommy. You remind me of him. Same lost look, same feeling that the world has no place for you. But Danny was wrong, and so are you. The world needs people like you. Your daughter needs you. 3 hours later, they were sitting in an all-night diner. Tommy had showered at Charles's hotel, put on clean clothes Charles had bought, and eaten his first real meal in days. Here's what we're going to do, Charles said. First, you're checking into a treatment facility. Not the VA, a private place that actually knows how to treat combat trauma. I can't afford. I can. There's a place in Malibu called Serenity Hills. They specialize in treating veterans with PTSD. Real doctors, real therapy. Tommy's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Bronson, that costs thousands of dollars. Tommy, I made more money last year than most people make in a lifetime. Using it to help a fellow veteran get his life back. That's worth every penny. Charles leaned forward. Second, while you're getting help, we're going to fight for your daughter. We're getting you the best family lawyer money can buy. Why would you do this for me? Charles was quiet for a moment. Because I failed Danny Murphy. I didn't listen when he told me he was scared. I wasn't there when he needed me most. I'm not going to fail another veteran. 6 months later, Tommy Rodriguez had completed treatment at Serenity Hills. He'd learned coping techniques for his flashbacks and nightmares. He'd stopped drinking completely. Most importantly, he'd started to believe he could be a good father again. Charles had hired Margaret Chin, one of LA's best family lawyers. When Tommy's ex-wife saw he was getting real help and making genuine progress, she agreed to postpone the adoption proceedings and allow supervised visits. The first visit was at a family counseling center. Tommy was more nervous than before any combat mission. What if she doesn't remember me? He asked Charles. Then you'll be patient. You'll let her get to know you again. Katie was 8 now, with long dark hair and her father's eyes. She was shy at first, but when Tommy asked about school, she began to warm up. I like art class, she said quietly. I draw pictures of families. Tommy's heart broke and mended at the same time. A year after that night in the alley, Tommy was working as a counselor at a veterans center, helping other combat veterans. He had his own apartment, a steady job, and weekend visits with Katie. Charles attended Tommy's graduation from counselor training. After the ceremony, Tommy introduced Charles to his daughter. Katie, Tommy said, this is Mr. Bronson. He's the reason Daddy is healthy now. Katie shook Charles's hand. Thank you for helping my daddy. Charles knelt down to her level. Your daddy didn't need my help being a good man, sweetheart. He just needed someone to remind him that he was worth saving. In 1995, 17 years after that night in the alley, Charles received an invitation to Tommy Rodriguez's wedding. Tommy had met a nurse who worked at the Veterans Center. At the reception, Tommy asked Charles to dance with his daughter, now 25 and a social worker helping homeless veterans. Mr. Bronson, Katie said as they danced, I want you to know something. I've helped over 300 homeless veterans in the past 5 years. Every one of them is alive today because my father refused to give up on them. She paused. And my father refused to give up on them because you refused to give up on him. Charles Bronson died in 2003. At his funeral, Tommy Rodriguez delivered one of the eulogies. 25 years ago, Tommy said, his voice steady despite his tears, I was ready to end my own life in an alley downtown. Charles Bronson heard me crying and refused to walk away. Tommy looked out at the congregation. Charles played tough guys in movies, but in real life, he was tough in the way that matters most. He was tough enough to care about a broken stranger. Tough enough to invest in someone everyone else had written off. That night, I thought my story was over. Charles showed me it was just the beginning of a new chapter. Because that's what real heroes do, they don't just save lives, they help people discover their lives are worth saving. Today, the Tommy Rodriguez Veterans Center in Los Angeles helps over 500 homeless veterans each year. Above the entrance is a plaque, in honor of Charles Bronson, who taught us that no veteran should ever fight alone. But the real memorial isn't a building. It's the hundreds of veterans who got second chances because one man refused to walk past a crying soldier in an alley. That's the Charles Bronson story that matters most. Not the vigilante movies, but the man who heard someone crying in the dark and stopped to help. The man who understood that real strength isn't about how tough you are, it's about how much you're willing to do for someone who can't help themselves.